Please comment where you are watching in the world. I should have known from the moment he used the word frequency during a first date that things were going to go sideways. But there I was, barefoot in Tsangu, sipping a turmeric latte in a cafe with more plants than chairs, thinking, wow, he's so in touch with himself. His name was Arjun, or that's what he went by in Bali. I later found out his real name was Mark, and he was from New Jersey. But when I met him, he was wearing linen pants, had a man bun, and introduced himself by saying, I read your energy before you even sat down. I should have run. Instead, I smiled like an idiot and said, oh yeah? What did it say? He said, that you're not grounded, that you're searching for something, but your light is strong. Again, idiot. But you have to understand, I was in a weird place. I'd just quit my job, ended a 5-year relationship, and flown to Bali with the vague idea of finding myself. I was staying in a shared villa with 2 other women who were doing yoga teacher training, journaling about their inner child, and microdosing cacao. It felt like everyone around me was leveling up spiritually, and I was still crying over my ex in the shower. So when Arjun looked at me with those calm, steady eyes and said, you're not broken. You're just vibrating at the wrong frequency. It felt like being seen for the first time in months. He didn't ask for my number. Said technology was a distraction from presence. Instead, he told me to meet him at a waterfall the next morning. If you show up, he said, it means you're ready to receive. I showed up. Of course I showed up. We climbed barefoot over slippery rocks while he spoke in metaphors. He said things like water teaches us to flow, and every wound is just an unopened portal. He held my hand as we crossed the river, looked into my eyes, and said, you need to be unburdened. Then he kissed me. It was gentle at first, then intense. His hands didn't just touch me, they pressed, like he was trying to unlock something under my skin. I let him. I wanted to be unlocked. We spent the day together. He took me to a hidden cafe with no Wi-Fi, introduced me to a woman who made trauma-cleansing smoothies, and then invited me back to his place to align our breath. That night, we had sex on a mattress on the floor surrounded by crystals and burning sage. He whispered affirmations into my ear while I cried and didn't know why. The next morning, he made me a smoothie with mushrooms in it, not the fun kind, the adaptogenic kind, and said, you're already healing. I moved in 3 days later. It wasn't official. I just started sleeping there more than at my villa. I'd wake up to the sound of him chanting, or sometimes pacing the room with his eyes closed, muttering things I didn't understand. He said he was channeling. I thought it was cool. Different. Sacred. He didn't believe in titles. Said boyfriend and girlfriend were colonial constructs. Said love was too expansive to be owned. But he also told me not to share my energy with other men. Said it would dilute our connection. I asked if that meant he was exclusive too. He smiled and said, I don't believe in possession. So no. I let it go. Told myself I was being too Western, too conditioned, that maybe monogamy was a cage. But the first time I saw him flirting with a girl at a breathwork ceremony, touching her hair, whispering something in her ear, I felt something crack. I asked about it later. He said, that's your shadow self reacting. I said I felt hurt. He said, pain is resistance. I said I didn't like it. He said, you're projecting. Every time I tried to talk about my feelings, he turned it into a spiritual lesson. He said I needed to meditate more, to stop identifying with pain, to transcend ego. He started suggesting cleanses. First food, no meat, no dairy, no cooked food. Then contact, no calls with family, no texts to friends. They're keeping you in your old story, he said. You need to unplug. I believed him. I stopped calling my sister. I stopped FaceTiming my best friend. I told myself it was part of the journey, that I was clearing space for something new. Then came the silence days. He'd sometimes go whole days without speaking. Said he was communing with Source. I wasn't allowed to interrupt. If I spoke, he'd hold up his hand and close his eyes like my voice was static. I started waiting for him to want me again. For the night he'd finally look at me like I was sacred again. But mostly, he looked past me. Then he started correcting my energy. He'd say things like, your aura is murky today, or you're leaking power from your womb space. I didn't even know what that meant, but he said it in such a calm, authoritative way that I started believing it. I started apologizing for things I didn't understand. He said my body was holding trauma, and that he could help release it. The releases always ended in sex. Sometimes I didn't want to. Sometimes I said no. He'd say, "You're blocking the healing." And then he'd keep going. And I'd stop saying no. Because I didn't want to be a blockage. I wanted to be free. After a while, I stopped feeling anything during sex. I just floated above it, like I was watching someone else, someone hollow, someone learning what it meant to be surrendered. He started charging people for sessions. Energy work, soul retrieval, womb healing, $111 for 30 minutes, $333 for a full soul detox. Women came to the house in robes, carrying journals. They'd leave crying. Sometimes they'd message him afterward. He'd read the messages out loud and laugh. I asked if he was sleeping with them too. He didn't answer. Just said, "Not everyone is ready to expand their capacity for love." I wanted to leave. I fantasized about booking a flight, disappearing, going back to my old life. But I didn't know where my passport was. He'd taken it for safekeeping. When I asked for it, he said, "You're not ready to return to the Matrix." I stopped asking. Then one night, during a ceremonial cacao circle, I had a panic attack. My chest tightened. My hands went numb. I couldn't breathe. I whispered that I needed help, and he said in front of everyone, "This is what ego death looks like. Don't rescue her. Let her go through it." No one moved. No one touched me. I curled up on the floor and sobbed until I passed out. The next morning, he said, "You're reborn now." I didn't feel reborn. I felt broken. That was the moment something inside me clicked. Not all the way, but enough. Enough to start planning. I waited until he went to one of his men's embodiment retreats. He said it was in Ubud. Said he'd be gone 2 days. I knew he'd leave his laptop behind, he always did. Said the EMFs messed with his chakras. I found my passport in a folder labeled Attachments. I found my debit card in the pocket of one of his hoodies. I booked a flight for that night. I packed quietly, wrote a note I never left, got a motorbike taxi to the airport, never looked back. I stayed in a hotel in Singapore for 3 days, cried in the shower, ate burgers, slept with the lights on. He messaged me once. Just one line. "I hope you find what your ego wanted." I blocked him. Months passed. I never went back to Bali. Bangkok felt like freedom. I just ended a relationship that had left me wrung out and hollow. Landed in Thailand with one suitcase, a laptop, and the kind of reckless optimism that comes from heartbreak. I found a cheap Airbnb in On Nut, started working remotely, and told myself this was the start of something new. Something soft. Something mine. The city was everything at once, loud, fragrant, too bright, too fast. Tuk-tuks weaving through traffic like they were late to the apocalypse. Street food that tasted like fire and sugar. Night markets with knockoff Balenciaga and bootleg DVDs from 2003. I loved it. I loved the anonymity of it. And then I met him. His name was Leo. At least, that's what he told me. We met at a rooftop bar in Thongler. One of those bougie spots where the cocktails cost triple what they should, but the view makes you forget. I was there alone, not intentionally, just one of those nights where all my expat group chat plans dissolved into flakiness. He slid into the bar stool next to me like he'd been invited. Said, "You don't strike me as someone who waits for company." I smiled. "And you don't strike me as someone who drinks alone." He laughed, low confident. Told me I had tired eyes, like I'd seen too much. It should have been a red flag, but I was flattered. I hadn't been flirted with in months. Not by someone this attractive. Tall, well-dressed, American accent, but slightly off, a hint of something European in the vowels. He bought me a drink, then another. Talked about his business, crypto something, real estate something else. He used words like decentralized and offshore holdings and leveraged with the ease of someone used to not being questioned. I didn't care. I just liked the attention. The way he looked at me like he'd already decided. After the third drink, he said, "I'm heading to a party in Sukhumvit. Private place. You should come." I hesitated. He said, "You're safe with me." I should have walked away. But I'd been lonely. And he was charming. And I was wearing a dress I felt good in. And I didn't want to go back to my Airbnb and eat mango slices alone watching reruns on YouTube. So I said yes. We left the bar. He called a car, not a Grab, but something else. An app one didn't recognize. The car was black, sleek, tinted windows. The driver didn't speak. Leo opened the door for me, placed a hand on the small of my back. Inside, the AC was freezing. The leather seat sticky against my thighs. I asked where the party was. He said, "Just a few minutes away." I checked my phone. No signal. I asked again. He said, "You worry too much." I laughed nervously. Tried to play it cool. The car kept going. Not toward Succumbit. Not toward anywhere I recognized. The buildings got lower. The lights fewer. The streets narrower. I said, "This isn't the way, right?" Leo looked out the window. Didn't answer. I reached for my phone again, still no service. Then I noticed the windows didn't have handles. And the doors didn't have locks on the inside. The driver said something in Thai. Leo replied, fluent, fast. I felt it then. That creeping, cold realization. Something was wrong. I said, "I want to go back." Leo turned to me. Smiled. Said, "Don't be dramatic." I said, "I'm serious. Let me out." He leaned in closer. Said, "You're not going to make this difficult, are you?" His voice was calm. Too calm. I started to panic. Tried the other door. Nothing. Slammed my hand against the window. The driver didn't flinch. Leo grabbed my wrist, not hard, just firm. Said, "You're fine. You're just overstimulated. Happens all the time." I yanked away, heart pounding. Tried to scream, but my throat caught. Then luck. The car came to a red light. A real one. And I saw a motorbike pull up next to us, a delivery guy, green grab food jacket, helmet cracked. I banged on the window. Screamed. The driver looked nervous. Leo cursed. I screamed again. The delivery guy looked over, confused. I mouthed help. And then miracle, the door unlocked. I still don't know how. Maybe the driver panicked. Maybe he hit the wrong button. Maybe the universe decided I'd had enough. I shoved the door open, barefoot now, heels in hand, and ran. The motorbike guy yelled something. Leo tried to follow. I ran into traffic. Didn't stop. Didn't look back. Found a 7-Eleven. Locked myself in the bathroom. Called a friend. Shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. Police didn't help. Said it was my word against his. No license plate. No app record. No photos. Just a name, Leo. And a face that still shows up in my dreams. I never saw him again. But sometimes at night, I scroll through Tinder with a fake profile. Just to see. And once, just once, I saw him. Different name. Same face. Same smile that says, "You're safe with me." I found him on my For You page. The clip was 30 seconds long. Just a guy, mid-30s, soft voice, eyes like he hadn't slept in a week, saying, "If you're constantly attracting emotionally unavailable people, it's because you don't believe you deserve to be chosen. But I see you. I choose you." I watched it 5 times. Not because it was profound, but because it felt like he was talking to me. Like he knew. I clicked on his profile. At Dr. Jonah Mindful. Hundreds of videos. All filmed in dim lighting, with lo-fi beats in the background and captions like "For the anxious attachment girlies," and if he wanted to, he would, but that doesn't mean you're not worthy. He had 1.2 million followers. He was a licensed therapist, or at least he said he was. His bio read, LMFT. Trauma-informed. Somatic specialist. Here to hold space. I didn't even know what half of that meant. But I followed him. Started watching his videos every night before bed, like they were lullabies for my inner child. He talked about patterns, about healing, about how love shouldn't feel like abandonment. He said things like, "Your nervous system isn't broken, it's brilliant." That line lived in my head for days. Then he went live one night. I joined. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, wearing a faded hoodie, hair messy in a way that looked deliberate. He took questions, gave advice, said holding space at least 8 times. Then he read a comment out loud. At Neurotic Mermaid says, "What if I'm just too much for people?" That was me. He looked directly into the camera and said, "Then those people aren't your people." I cried. I know how parasocial this sounds. How dumb. But in that moment, I felt seen. Not just seen, chosen. So I messaged him. Didn't expect a reply. But 2 days later, he followed me back. Then Med. Said, "I like your energy." I told him I was surprised he responded. He said, "You're not like the others." I should have known then. But he made me feel special. Said he usually didn't connect with followers, but something about me felt aligned. Asked if I was in LA. I was. He said, "Let's get coffee." Nothing formal. Just space to be. He picked the place, some wellness cafe in Silver Lake with mushroom lattes and a tarot reader in the back. He was already there when I arrived, typing on his laptop, headphones around his neck. He stood when he saw me. Hugged me like we'd known each other for years. Said, "Your nervous system feels safe." I didn't even know what that meant, but I nodded. We talked for 2 hours. About childhood, about trauma, about how hard it is to date when you've had inconsistent caregivers. He didn't ask for anything, didn't flirt, just listened. At the end he said, "I'd love to hold space for you officially. I have sliding scale rates." That's how it started. Weekly Zoom sessions, $85 a pop. No diagnosis, no treatment plan, just me crying while he told me my pain was sacred. He said my inner child had been chronically unseen. He said my exes were mirrors for my unmet needs. He said I was finally ready to receive. And I believed him, because he used words like somatic and polyvagal and co-regulation. Words I didn't fully understand, but that sounded like science wrapped in softness. Then the messages started. Outside of sessions, late-night texts like, "Just thought of you. Hope your heart feels held." Or, "I had a dream you were running through a field barefoot. I think your psyche's trying to be free." At first, I thought it was sweet. Boundaries blurry, but sweet. Then he sent a voice memo. His voice slower, lower. He said, "I just want you to know I'm proud of how open you're becoming. It's rare. Most women, they don't let themselves unravel." I felt warm, exposed, a little confused. I replied, "Is this still therapy?" He said, "Healing doesn't fit in a box." Then he invited me to a retreat. Said he was hosting a small group in Topanga, breath work, shadow work, trauma-informed embodiment. Said I could come for free. I said yes. I was excited, nervous, packed a notebook, yoga clothes, incense. The retreat was strange. Not a group. Just 3 women, all younger than him, all beautiful in that sad, floaty way. We did eye-gazing exercises, screamed into pillows, sat in a circle, and talked about our mothers. He led everything shirtless. He said we needed to deconstruct hierarchy. We slept in the same house. He made us smoothies in the morning. At night, he'd read poetry by Rilke. One night, we all danced in silence under the moon. He held my face after and said, "You're not broken. You're blooming." We kissed. I told myself it was sacred. We slept together that night. It wasn't rough. It wasn't tender. It felt curated. Like he'd done it 100 times. Like I was another step in someone else's syllabus. The next morning, he kissed my forehead and said, "You're safe now." He stopped charging me for sessions after that. Said we'd shifted into something more integrated. But everything started feeling warped. The other women started pulling away from me, whispering, giving me tight smiles. I asked if something was wrong. One of them said, "He told me you weren't ready." I said, "Ready for what?" She just looked at me and said, "You'll see." Then she left. I asked Jonah what she meant. He said, "She's projecting. That's her wound talking." He started getting colder, less responsive. Missed calls, delayed replies. I asked if I'd done something wrong. He said, "You're becoming attached. That's not healthy." I said, "You slept with me." He said, "That was medicine." I felt sick. I started Googling. Found forums, threads, women talking about him. Same story. Therapist turned lover turned ghost. Words like manipulation, boundary violations, cult vibes. One woman said he called her medicine too. Another said he filmed them. I confronted him. He didn't deny it. He just said, "You're not the first to confuse healing with love." I said, "You were my therapist." He said, "Only for a few sessions. Nothing formal." I said, "You said you were licensed." He said, "Licensing is a form of colonial control." I left, reported him to the board. They said he wasn't licensed in California. No records under his name. No credentials. I tried to post about it. He messaged me. Said, "I hold you in compassion. Even now." Then he blocked me. But I still see him. On TikTok. I moved to Thailand for peace. That's what I told people anyway. In reality, I was running from a breakup, from burnout, from the slow suffocation of my apartment back in London that still smelled like my ex's cologne. I wanted sun. I wanted space. I wanted to be somewhere no one knew my name. Chiang Mai was perfect for that. Digital nomad central. Cafes with oat milk lattes and Wi-Fi strong enough to run a startup. Yoga studios on every block. Everyone either healing or hustling. I was both. I rented a tiny apartment above a Thai-French bakery, started freelance writing full-time, joined a co-working space, and told myself I was finally living the dream. And then I met him. His name was Nico. We were both at a night market. I was buying mango sticky rice. He was in line behind me, tall, tan, barefoot in leather sandals like he belonged on a yacht. He leaned in and said, "That one's the best stall. The other one uses canned coconut milk." I turned, startled. He smiled like he already knew me. French accent, loose white shirt, hair tied back. He looked like the kind of man who'd lived 5 lives already and made sure everyone knew it. I laughed. "You live here?" He said, "I exist here." I should have rolled my eyes. Instead, I smiled. We sat on the curb eating mango sticky rice out of styrofoam containers. He told me he was a travel photographer. Said he'd been everywhere from Morocco to Myanmar. Showed me his Instagram, full of moody beach shots, women in hammocks, drone footage over temples. He said he wasn't looking for anything serious. I said me neither. That night, he walked me home. Kissed me on my balcony. Told me I tasted like sugar and smoke. I didn't ask what he meant. I let him spend the night. The sex was slow, confident, like he was trying to teach me something. He whispered French against my neck and held my face like it was fragile. Afterward, he lit a cigarette and asked if I believed in fate. I said, "I don't know." He said, "Me neither. But I believe in timing." I should have known then. But he was magnetic. He made everything feel like a movie. He'd pick me up on his motorbike and take me to hidden waterfalls. We'd drink in rooftop bars with no signage. He knew everyone, the bartenders, the artists, the guys who built the furniture at the co-working space. He spoke Thai better than I did. Tipped in cash. Smiled with his whole face. He said he'd never felt more aligned with someone. He said I had old soul energy. He said, "You're not like the others." I didn't ask what the others meant. I let myself believe I was special. But slowly things shifted. He started showing up unannounced. Once at 7 a.m. with coffee. Once at midnight, drunk, saying he missed me. He always had a reason. I was in the area. I had a dream about you. I just needed to see your face. I told myself it was romantic. It wasn't. He started taking photos of me all the time. While I was sleeping, showering, cooking. He said I was his muse. That his followers were obsessed with me. That I had a body made for light. I laughed. Tried to brush it off. Until I found a photo of me on his Instagram. Naked. Not graphic. Nothing technically explicit. Just me lying on my stomach, sheets pulled low, back arched. My face out of frame. But it was me. Thousands of likes. Comments like, "Where do I find one like this?" And "Thailand looks good on you." I confronted him. He said, "You looked beautiful. You should be proud." I said, "You didn't ask." He said, "I didn't think I had to." I made him delete it. He said I was being dramatic. I should have left then. I didn't. Because the way he looked at me after sex made me forget everything. Because his hands knew things about me that I didn't know myself. Because he said we were building something pure. Then there was the girl. It was during a trip to Pai. We'd rented a bungalow. Spent the day in hot springs, drinking cheap beer and laughing under the trees. That night, he left to get more cigarettes. Took an hour. When he came back, he smelled like perfume. I didn't say anything. The next morning, I saw her, a tall, blonde backpacker at the cafe next door, wearing his t-shirt. I asked who she was. He said, "She's just passing through." I said, "Did you sleep with her?" He said, "You said you didn't want anything serious." I stared at him. He said, "Don't make this about your ego." I cried. He held me. Said I was overthinking. That pain was just proof of attachment. That jealousy was colonial conditioning. That I needed to unlearn ownership. I hated that it made sense. I hated that I stayed. And then came the money. Not a lot, just little things. "Babe, can you cover this hostel? My card's acting up. The ATM's down, can you spot me? I'll send you a transfer tonight." He never did. He always had an excuse. Bank error. Transfer delay. Crypto wallet locked. It wasn't about the money. It was the way he made me feel guilty for asking. Like I was betraying the flow of our connection. He said money was just energy. I started paying for everything. Then he asked if I wanted to collaborate. Said we could build a travel couple brand. Said people would eat it up. Hot girl, wild man, tropical love story. Said we could launch a Patreon, do retreats, monetize our vibe. I hesitated. He said, "You're afraid of your light." So I said yes. We filmed content. Photo shoots on the beach. Meditation videos. Morning routines. He'd edit everything. Post it. Tag me. Then delete the tags. Said it kept the mystery alive. I started getting messages from women. Some curious, some flirty. One asked if I was the new one. I replied, "What do you mean?" She said, "He does this every season." That's when it clicked. I wasn't special. I was next. I confronted him. He didn't deny it. He just said, "You knew what this was." I said, "I thought we were building something." He said, "We were. Just not what you thought." I left. Or tried to. He showed up at my apartment 2 nights later, drunk. Kicked the door. Screamed my name. Said I was stealing his content. Threatened to report me for fraud. Said I owed him emotional royalties. I called the landlord. They told me to call the police. I didn't. I just left. Moved to a different neighborhood. Got off social media. Blocked him on everything. A week later, a new account followed me. Photos of me. Old ones. From our time together. But posted with captions like "She lied to me," and "This is what betrayal looks like." He never named me. But he didn't have to. People figured it out. I started getting comments. DMs, accusations. I reported the account. Nothing happened. I tried to talk to the platform. No response. Eventually, I deleted everything. Even now, I don't know how much of my image is still floating around. How many backup drives he has. How many private groups he shared me in. I was independent, secure in my choices, and careful about who I let into my life. That all changed when I met him, Thomas. At first, he seemed perfect. Charming, smart, and completely captivated by me. He had this way of making me feel like I was the center of his universe, even though we'd only known each other for a short time. It wasn't just about the attention, though. It was how he listened. He paid attention to the smallest details about me. My likes, my dislikes, my desires. He made me feel seen. Our relationship began with long conversations over coffee, followed by dinners at cozy restaurants where we'd talk for hours. I was drawn to his intelligence, to the way he seemed to understand my quirks and my needs. It felt like he was the kind of man who understood the complexities of intimacy. It was exciting, and before long, it turned into something deeper. But what I didn't realize at the time was that what I thought was a blossoming connection was more like a performance that I didn't even know I was part of. Initially, Thomas and I would exchange emails, mostly lighthearted conversations about our day-to-day lives. He was always thoughtful, always engaging. It felt like we were building a relationship through these long, intimate exchanges. I'd tell him about my work, my frustrations, the little things that made my day. He'd reply with stories of his own life, his travels, his interests, his observations about the world. And sometimes we'd talk about Norte things. It wasn't anything explicit at first. Just playful banter about what we liked, what we fantasized about, and what turned us on. At first, it felt liberating to talk openly with him. There was something freeing about sharing my desires without any fear of judgment. I thought he was just being open, that he was safe. One night, we were talking about fantasies. I'd never really shared mine with anyone before, but something about Thomas made me feel comfortable enough to do so. I wrote a long email, pouring my thoughts into words, things I'd never told anyone, things I'd only ever imagined. I told him about my desires, my curiosity about certain experiences, the things I longed for but never had the courage to pursue. I clicked send, feeling vulnerable but also oddly empowered. The next day, he responded. His email was full of compliments, reassuring me that my fantasies were normal, even exciting. "You're so open, so honest," he wrote. "Most people would never be able to express what you just did. I love that about you." It felt good, reassuring. I thought I had found someone who understood me, who saw me not just as a partner, but as someone who was worthy of exploration. But what I didn't know was that Thomas wasn't just interested in exploring my fantasies, he was collecting them. The emails continued, and with each one I shared more. The lines between fantasy and reality began to blur. I told him things I never thought I would. And every time I did, he would respond with words that made me feel even more secure. He praised me for my openness, for my willingness to trust him with these private, intimate details. And in return, I gave him more. My desires, my thoughts, my dreams. But one day, I noticed something strange. Thomas began to write back more slowly, almost like he was savoring my words. He'd compliment my writing, the way I expressed myself. "Your words are so vivid," he'd say. "It's like I can see it all in my mind. You're such an incredible storyteller." It wasn't just the praise. It was the way he described my fantasies, like he was imagining them in his head, like he was living them. And the more he responded, the more he began to shape my fantasies into something different. He started adding his own details to the stories I told him. He'd take my words and expand on them, twisting my desires into something more explicit, more daring. At first, I didn't mind. I thought it was just him engaging with me, enhancing the stories. But then I realized something. These weren't my fantasies anymore. They had become something else. Something that didn't feel like me anymore. A month later, I received a message from him that chilled me to my core. It wasn't a long email, just a short message with a link to a website. He'd been talking about writing, about turning our conversations into something more professional, something more serious. I opened the link, curious but also wary. What I saw made my stomach drop. The website was a self-published platform for erotic literature. And there, under the newest releases section, was a story titled, Her Secret Desires, Unveiling the Truth. I clicked on it, and as the page loaded, I saw my words, my private words, written there in black and white, but not as I had written them. They were expanded upon, edited, and made even more explicit. The email exchanges we'd had, the fantasies I'd shared, were now a story, his version of my desires. I felt sick. I recognized my words, my thoughts, but they were twisted, manipulated into something I didn't recognize. And the worst part, there was no mention of me. No acknowledgement that these were my personal emails, my private fantasies. He had taken them, turned them into a story, and published them for the world to read. I confronted him immediately. The email I sent was full of anger, confusion, and hurt. How could he do this? How could he take something so personal, something I had shared with him in confidence, and turn it into a product? His response was almost immediate. "I'm sorry, I should have asked first," he wrote. "But don't you see? This is a form of art. It's a way of sharing our connection with the world. Your words are powerful, and they deserve to be shared. People want to hear your story. You've inspired so many already." I felt like I was suffocating. It wasn't about sharing a connection. It wasn't about us. It was about him, his desire to use me, to turn my vulnerability into something for his personal gain. And the worst part, I had let him. I had trusted him, opened myself up to him, and he had turned my intimate thoughts into something he could sell, something he could profit from. I didn't think I was the type to get involved with someone who had control issues. I mean, who does, right? But when I met Alad, I thought I'd found someone who was perfect for me. He was charming, intelligent, and had this quiet intensity that drew me in. I liked the way he listened. He wasn't the typical guy who wanted to talk about himself all the time. He genuinely cared about what I had to say. At first, it felt like a fairy tale. We met through a mutual friend while I was visiting Tel Aviv for a work trip. We spent the night talking about everything, our favorite movies, travel, books. He was easy to talk to, and the chemistry was immediate. We went on a few dates after that, just walking around the city, getting to know each other. There was this connection between us, this unspoken understanding that felt right. But the more I got to know Alad, the more I realized there was something different about him. He was into tech, really into it. He worked in security, in the field of surveillance and data analysis. I didn't think much of it at first. He was a guy with a job, right? But the more we talked about his work, the more I realized how much his life revolved around truth and honesty. It was subtle at first. He asked me questions about my past, things that felt a little too probing. Things I thought were personal, like my childhood, my relationships, my fears. I didn't mind answering, though. After all, we were getting to know each other, right? But as we spent more time together, I started to notice a pattern. He always wanted to know more about how I felt, more about how I reacted to things. It was flattering at first, honestly. I thought he was just being curious. But there were moments when I felt like I was under a microscope, like I was being watched. One evening, we were lying in bed, just talking like we usually did. He mentioned his work, and I casually asked about the security systems he dealt with. That's when he told me something that I thought was a joke at first. "I've been developing this wearable," Elad said, his voice casual, "that tracks arousal levels and stress. You know, to help with emotional truth. I laughed, thinking he was being playful. "What do you mean tracks arousal? Like with a watch?" He chuckled. "Exactly. It's a little more sophisticated than a watch, but yes, it's something I'm working on for work. But I think it could be useful for people like us." People like us? I didn't know what he meant by that, but I didn't question it. He had this way of making everything sound intriguing, like it was part of some big, important project. But the next day, Elad asked if I'd be willing to try out one of the devices. He was clear that it wasn't anything too intrusive, just a small, wearable patch that would track my emotional responses. At first, I thought it was weird, but I agreed. After all, it seemed harmless enough, right? And Alad had this way of making things sound so scientific, so well-researched. It wasn't until later that I realized how much I had let myself get swept up in his ideas. The device wasn't uncomfortable at all. It was just a patch that adhered to the skin, and Alad assured me that it was non-invasive. He told me that the data would help him understand emotional truths better. I thought it was strange, but the more I wore it, the more Alad encouraged me to explore my feelings. He'd ask me to describe how I felt during certain moments, like when we went on a date or when we had sex. His questions weren't overtly manipulative, but the way he asked them made me feel like I had to provide the right answer. Like I was being evaluated. There was a time when we had an argument about something small, and Alad later asked me about how I really felt. Did you feel tense? Angry? How did your body react? He'd ask. It wasn't just about understanding me anymore. It was about breaking down every reaction I had, every little emotion, and categorizing it. I couldn't shake the feeling that Alad wasn't just interested in me emotionally. He was using me as data for something much bigger. It wasn't long before Alad started asking me questions during sex. What are you feeling right now? He'd ask, his voice soft but insistent. How's your body reacting? How is your arousal right now? At first, I thought it was just a game, a way for us to be more open with each other. But the more he asked, the more I realized how obsessed he was with tracking my responses. He wasn't asking to connect with me, he was asking to measure me. Then came the night when I found out just how far things had gone. I was looking through my phone one evening, trying to find a text from a friend, when I saw a notification from Alad's app. It was a file labeled emotional data. Curiosity got the best of me, and I opened it. My heart stopped. The file was filled with detailed reports on my emotional and physical responses, my heart rate, my arousal levels, my stress indicators, tracked during our intimate moments. There were charts, graphs, even notes about how my emotional truth seemed to shift based on certain stimuli. The worst part? I didn't remember giving him consent to track this. I never signed up for him to collect my data, to turn my body and my emotions into something he could measure and analyze. I confronted Alad that night, my hands shaking as I held up my phone. What is this? Why do you have all this data on me? He looked at me, almost like he wasn't surprised. It's just data, he said, as if that would explain everything. It's about understanding the truth of our emotions. You're helping me. You're helping us get closer. I felt sick. I never agreed to any of this. I never gave you permission to track me, to use my data like this. You've been recording me, measuring me, without my consent. His face remained calm, but there was something in his eyes that sent a chill down my spine. I thought we were working on something bigger. This is about honesty. This is about stripping away all the facades, getting to the core of who we really are. Don't you want to understand yourself better? I didn't know what to say. I had been playing along this whole time, thinking it was part of a relationship, thinking it was just an experiment in emotional intimacy. But now it was clear that it wasn't about intimacy, it was about control. It was about using me to gather data, to push me further into submission under the guise of truth. I used to believe that the key to a successful relationship was open communication. My parents had taught me that. Be honest, be real, and always listen to your partner. That's what I thought love was supposed to be. But when I met Thomas, I quickly learned how much I didn't understand about manipulation. We met at a mutual friend's party, and from the moment he spoke, I felt a connection. Thomas was calm, composed, and he listened in a way that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He asked me about my work, my hobbies, my fears. He was the kind of guy who made you want to open up. I thought it was because I felt comfortable with him, but I didn't realize then how much of it was his skill. How he used my vulnerability as a way to weave his influence into every part of my life. At first, things were perfect. He made me feel special, like I was more than just another girl. But there was something about his too perfect nature that I couldn't place. He was a practicing psychologist, so when he'd talk about relationships or emotions, it all seemed like sage advice. He understood people on a level I couldn't quite grasp. He knew what made them tick, what made them feel safe. And I thought, this is good. This is what I need in a partner. We had our first real conversation about therapy a couple of weeks into dating. It was casual at first. You know, Thomas said, his voice low, almost teasing, I'm surprised you haven't been to therapy before. You seem like someone who could really benefit from it. I could help you with that. I laughed, a little taken aback. I'm not sure I need therapy, Thomas. I'm just figuring things out. He smiled, but it wasn't a playful smile. It was calculating. Well, everyone has something they need to work through. Don't you want to feel better? To understand yourself more deeply? I think it would help you, more than you realize. There was something about his words that planted a seed of doubt in my mind. I wasn't someone who liked to think there was anything wrong with me, but the way he framed it, it made me wonder. Maybe I was missing something. Maybe I could be better, clearer. So, I agreed to see a therapist with him. At the time, it felt like a way to grow, to deepen our bond. But that's not what it was. The first few sessions were uneventful, nothing more than your average deep dive into emotions. But then something shifted. I started noticing little comments Thomas would make. When I'd expressed discomfort about certain things in our relationship, he'd often frame my feelings as overreactions. At first, I brushed it off as a difference of opinion. But then it started to happen more often. One night, after a disagreement about something small, something trivial really, he said, "You're probably just reacting this way because of past trauma. You should really talk about it in therapy. Maybe your issues with authority are making you resistant to me." It hit me hard. I was thrown off balance. Was I resistant? Was something from my past really affecting my behavior? I didn't know. I'd never thought of myself as someone with unresolved trauma, but Thomas had this way of making me second-guess myself. Every time I expressed frustration, he would gently guide it back to something I was doing wrong. He'd frame it as a weakness in me that I needed to address, a flaw I wasn't seeing. I didn't notice it at first, but slowly every problem we had, every little issue was somehow my fault. Every argument was reframed as a misunderstanding on my part. My resistance to something would be seen as a control issue. And when I asked for space or needed to pull away, he'd say, "You're just retreating because you can't handle vulnerability. You're pushing me away." I started doubting myself. Thomas would point out my triggers, things I hadn't realized I was reacting to. He told me that certain behaviors were signs of deep-seated emotional issues. And so, I went deeper into therapy, trying to fix these supposed flaws. These reactions, he said, were rooted in my past. I spent hours exploring my childhood, re-examining old wounds. And the more I explored, the more I felt like I was unraveling. I started to see the world through a different lens, one that Thomas had subtly shaped for me. But the more I tried to fix myself, the more he reinforced the idea that I was the one with the problem. One evening, we were talking about our intimacy. We'd had a fight earlier that day about something trivial, but I could feel the tension between us lingering. Thomas suggested that perhaps my resistance during sex was related to my control issues. "You need to trust me more," he said softly, looking into my eyes with that calm, reassuring gaze. "The resistance you feel is just your fear talking. It's not about me. It's about you not trusting your instincts." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't just a casual comment. It was like a judgment wrapped in a suggestion. I hadn't realized it at the time, but that was the turning point. It wasn't just about me opening up emotionally anymore. He wanted me to open up physically, but only on his terms. I started to feel more pressure, more confusion. Every time I resisted something, every time I said no or felt uncomfortable, it was framed as me not being able to let go, as me not trusting him. I felt suffocated by his understanding, by his diagnosis of my feelings. The real break came when he pushed me to try something sexually that I wasn't comfortable with. It wasn't something extreme, but it was something I had explicitly told him I didn't want to try. I felt uncomfortable even discussing it. "You need to be more open," he said one night after I hesitated. "This is an issue of control. You don't want to feel vulnerable, and that's okay. But you need to learn how to surrender to me. We're supposed to trust each other." I tried to explain that I wasn't ready, that I didn't feel comfortable with it. But Thomas, ever the therapist, gently pressed me. "You're just afraid. I can help you work through this. You need to let go of this resistance. We've been talking about it for weeks. It's a boundary you've created because of past trauma." At that moment, I realized something was deeply wrong. This wasn't about our relationship. This was about him pushing me to accept his narrative, his control, under the guise of therapy. The final straw came one night when he insisted we try an exercise where he would guide me through something intimate, but I couldn't fully consent to it. He framed it as part of my therapy, part of my healing. But when I said no, when I couldn't do it, his response wasn't what I expected. He told me that my discomfort was a sign of my unresolved issues. He minimized my feelings, made me feel like I was the one who needed to work harder, needed to give more. That was the moment I realized I wasn't healing. I was being manipulated. I was being controlled by his version of therapy, which was really just him controlling every part of me, emotionally, physically, and psychologically. I broke up with Thomas the next day. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but I had to walk away. I couldn't keep losing myself in his healing. I couldn't let him convince me that my boundaries were control issues, that my resistance was trauma. I wasn't the problem. He was. He was gaslighting me into believing that my discomfort, my needs, and my desires weren't valid. I had just gotten home from another doctor's appointment, where I'd spent the last hour explaining to my weary physician why my fatigue felt different this time, how my chronic illness seemed to be morphing into something new. He told me to take a break, relax. But I wasn't relaxed. I was tired of feeling like a burden, tired of taking medication that barely made a dent. And just when I thought I couldn't possibly meet anyone who would understand, Leo appeared on my screen. His profile picture was simple, just him sitting cross-legged on a mountaintop, looking peaceful, like a modern-day monk in an all-white outfit. He had a smile that seemed like he was letting the world in, and that was a rare thing to see. His bio was short, but intriguing. Healing starts from within. Let's detox our lives. I felt something in me stir, a quiet flicker of excitement. A healer. The kind of person who was gentle with the world. Just what I needed. We matched on a Wednesday night, after a few days of messaging back and forth. Leo didn't do the usual hey, or the dreaded what's up. He asked me about my day. My real day. He remembered what I'd said about struggling with my energy levels and followed up on it. I didn't realize then that he was setting the stage, setting me up to believe that he was the answer to my exhaustion. It felt too good to be true. I went to his place for our first date, a quiet evening in his apartment, which smelled faintly of incense and eucalyptus. The moment he opened the door, I noticed the calm that radiated off him. He moved slowly, deliberately. He didn't rush anything, even when he offered me tea. It wasn't your average chamomile either. This was some herbal concoction he'd mixed himself. For your energy, he said, his voice soft, almost soothing. He talked about how healing was a balance of mind, body, and spirit, how a good gut was the key to everything. I can help you, he told me as we sat in his living room. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe he had the answer. It didn't take long before I started seeing him more often, each visit more intense than the last. Every date was an opportunity for him to introduce me to a new way of healing. Detox teas, juices, supplements. He always had a suggestion for something I could try, a new breathwork technique that he said would reprogram my body. I felt lighter, not physically but mentally. He was opening me up to this world where all my physical ailments could be cured through mindfulness and natural remedies. He even called it a journey, something we were both on together. It was intoxicating. But soon, things started to change. I noticed it one evening when we were sitting on his couch, me sipping yet another herbal tea, him calmly asking about my medication. I really think you should stop taking those, he said, as casually as someone might suggest switching to a different shampoo. Those pills aren't helping you. They're just masking the problem. You're holding on to old trauma vibrations, you know? I blinked, a little stunned. The pills that had been keeping me upright for months. He was telling me they were the enemy. I shook my head, but I trusted him. I wanted to trust him, and over the following days, he convinced me. He started asking me to replace my prescribed medication with his teas, his herbs. He swore I'd feel the difference. It was subtle at first. The teas did make me feel a little better, a little lighter, and Leo's insistence that I had blockages began to resonate with me in ways I couldn't explain. But I was still so tired. My flare-ups came harder and faster, and I didn't know how to tell him, not when he was so convinced that this was the path to my healing. But the real horror started when I began to notice something more sinister. Leo had started filming me. He would ask me to lay on his couch, close my eyes, and breathe deeply. I just want to capture your energy, he'd say with a smile, as if it was no big deal. At first, it was just him recording me while I meditated, claiming it was part of the process, but then he started recording my flare-ups. The times when I could barely stand, when I was on the floor in pain, clutching my stomach as nausea gripped me. I'm documenting this for our healing journey vlog, he'd say, his voice calm as ever. This will be great for others to see. You're helping so many people, just by being vulnerable. But I wasn't helping anyone. I was losing myself. The final straw came when I found out about the vlog. I stumbled upon it one night while scrolling through social media, half-heartedly looking for distraction. There it was, Leo's page, filled with videos of me. Of my pain. Of my struggle. of my most vulnerable moments, presented as his healing journey. And there was no credit for me, no acknowledgement that these were my battles, my personal moments he was exposing to his followers for likes, for views. He was profiting off my sickness, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. I confronted him the next day. My voice was trembling, but I found the courage to speak up. "Leo," I said, "this isn't okay. You can't just put my health out there like that. This is personal." He smiled gently, as if I were overreacting. "It's for your own good, love. People need to see the truth. They need to understand what real healing looks like. You're part of something bigger than yourself." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw his perfect little world off its axis, but instead I walked out. I left the apartment, and I didn't look back. I didn't speak to him again after that night. It was hard, of course, because I'd invested so much time, so much hope into him, into this idea that he could help me. But as I walked away, I realized he'd been the one who needed help all along. He hadn't been there to heal me. He'd been there to control me. Months passed, and I slowly began to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy. There were days when I questioned my own judgment, when I doubted my decision to leave him behind. But I could see now. See how Leo had used my trust, my desperation, my illness, to further his own cause. I wasn't just a girlfriend to him. I was a project, a story for his followers. The hardest part wasn't leaving him. It was realizing that I had almost let him take everything from me. I'm writing this because I'm not sure where else to turn, and I feel like I've lost all perspective. What's the most normal thing that can happen when you meet someone who's really into their health? A couple of smoothie dates, maybe some salad bowls, all about the kale and the quinoa, right? But no, that wasn't the case for me. My relationship with Noah started innocently enough, but it spiraled into something I never thought I'd experience. I wish I could say I saw the signs earlier, but I didn't. And now I'm just trying to put the pieces together. So here's the story. It started at a vegan cafe in Melbourne, a place with more granola than you'd think possible. It was my first time there, meeting Noah for our first date. He had this calm, zen-like vibe. You know the type, the kind who's always talking about energy and alignment. We connected over our shared interest in health, and he was immediately passionate about it. Not just the I try to eat well kind of passionate, but more like the obsessive type. He'd talk about how food could be medicine, how going raw vegan could unlock your true potential. At first, I was intrigued. I was already into healthy living, doing yoga, eating plant-based meals, and working out regularly. But Noah had this whole philosophy that went beyond just diet and exercise. It was a way of life. It was a movement. I didn't think much of it. Honestly, I thought, hey, maybe I'm just overthinking it. It's a lifestyle, right? Some people get really into things. I'm sure it's fine. We spent a few weeks hanging out, talking about health, our mutual love for animals, and our values. I liked him. I was falling for him even. The more we hung out, the more I found myself aligning with his way of thinking. I remember the first time he invited me over to his place for a home-cooked meal. It was all raw vegetables, sprouted grains, and juices that looked more like something you'd find in a laboratory than an actual kitchen. But I trusted him. He was so confident in everything he said. After dinner, he made a point to give me a food healing lecture about the importance of clean eating and how it could detoxify my body. He went on about how, in just a few weeks of eating raw, I would feel amazing, more energy, clearer skin, better digestion. I was skeptical, but something about his energy made me want to believe him. It wasn't long before he convinced me to try it. It started slowly at first, just replacing a couple of meals with raw foods. But Noah didn't stop there. It wasn't enough to just eat raw. No, it had to be a complete lifestyle change. Soon, I was cutting out cooked food altogether. Every day was about finding new recipes, new ingredients, new ways to detoxify. If I questioned anything, even the smallest thing, he'd make it sound like I was doing something wrong. It started with his comments about my body. You're not eating enough fruit today. You should be having more greens. Have you tried this detox smoothie yet? And at first, I let it slide. I thought it was just him being passionate. But when he started suggesting I stop eating anything that wasn't raw, that's when I realized how deep it was going. I was trying to get into his routine, you know? I figured if I followed his plan, I'd feel better. I'd be better. But something started to feel off. Like I was just following orders. Then one morning, after a week of living like this, I woke up feeling completely drained. I couldn't focus. My stomach was bloated. I had headaches that wouldn't go away. But Noah said, it's just detox symptoms. Your body is releasing all the toxins. I believed him. After all, that's what I wanted to believe. I wanted this to work. I wanted to feel the way he said I would. But I didn't. A few weeks into this, things got weird. I'd be over at his apartment, and I'd feel sick, almost faint. Instead of being concerned, Noah would just look at me and say, "It's just your body trying to release the toxins. You're getting better." But I wasn't getting better. I was getting weaker. My skin was pale, my hair was thinning, and my energy was at an all-time low. But Noah, he was glowing. He was radiant. He was the picture of perfect health, and every time he talked about it, it felt like a lecture. "You need to stay aligned," he'd say. "You need to be 100% raw, otherwise you're not fully embracing your potential." I couldn't help but think that I wasn't the one being aligned. I was the one being controlled. It wasn't just about food anymore. It was about everything. Noah started suggesting other things. He wanted me to meditate for hours each day, to focus on my inner healing. He recommended I get a yoga teacher to clear the blockages in my body. When I told him I felt like I needed a break, he'd respond with something like, "You're not truly healing unless you're fully committed to this journey." I started to feel isolated. Every time I tried to hang out with my friends or do something outside of his world, he'd make me feel guilty. "Why aren't you embracing this? Why don't you want to be your best self?" It wasn't just about food or yoga. It was about everything I did. He wasn't just influencing my diet. He was influencing my entire life. One evening, after a particularly intense argument about cheating on my diet with a cooked meal, I found myself in a full-on meltdown. I'd had enough. I was so exhausted from this lifestyle, so drained from constantly following his rules. I felt like I had lost myself. I wasn't just doing it for me anymore. I was doing it to please him, to fit into his narrow definition of what it meant to be perfect. I tried to leave, but it wasn't easy. Noah didn't let me. He sent me messages every day, telling me I was undermining my potential by not being fully raw. He showed up at my door, bringing me healing smoothies, and trying to convince me that I wasn't ready to embrace the true power of the lifestyle yet. But I was done. I had lost who I was in this raw vegan maze, and it wasn't just the food. It was everything, his emotional manipulation, his guilt trips, his control. I eventually left. I blocked him on everything. But even now, months later, I still find myself questioning the way I've been conditioned. Am I supposed to be a perfect version of myself, constantly being improved? Or am I allowed to just be? I met Arlo at a friend's birthday party. We hit it off immediately, talking about travel, life goals, and random anecdotes from our childhoods. It was light and easy with no pressure. By the end of the night, we exchanged numbers, and I had a feeling this was more than just a casual fling. Our first date was at a trendy bar in Makati, and we spent hours talking, laughing, and sipping cocktails. I was surprised at how comfortable I felt with him, how easy it was to just be myself. He had this way of making everything feel like an adventure, whether it was talking about our favorite movies or debating the best street food in the city. It wasn't the usual superficial stuff you get with a first date. With Arlo, it felt real. A few more dates in, things started getting a little more physical. The chemistry between us was undeniable. The first time we kissed, it was electric, slow, sensual, and full of anticipation. By the time we ended the night, it was clear we wanted each other. But unlike the usual rush-to-bed routine, Arlo took things slow. It wasn't about just the physical connection. It was about building something deeper. And I was hooked. But then things started to shift. It wasn't anything major at first. Just subtle things. Little comments here and there that made me feel like maybe he was a little too invested in the idea of us. Like when we'd be out on a date and he'd pull out his phone to take pictures of us, of me, and then immediately post them on his social media. For the memories, he'd say. But it felt like more than that. Like he was already thinking about the content, about the brand we were building together. It wasn't until we got a little more serious that I started noticing how deeply ingrained this was in his life. Arlo was a vlogger. But not just any vlogger, he had a huge following. His videos were a mix of lifestyle content, travel vlogs, and casual personal updates. I had no idea how big he really was until he casually mentioned how his subscriber count was growing exponentially. It was the kind of growth that seemed too fast, too organic. I didn't mind it at first. I thought it was cute how proud he was of his little influencer life. We'd go out, and he'd casually film bits for his vlog, but always making sure I was comfortable with it. He respected my boundaries, or so I thought. But there were times when it felt like I wasn't just his girlfriend. I was as content. One evening, we were lying in bed, after a long night of Netflix and chilling. He pulled out his phone, as usual, to check something. I rolled over to rest my head on his chest, but he was focused, scrolling through his Instagram. "Babe, you look great tonight," he said, snapping a picture of me without asking. I laughed, half joking. "Are you taking a picture of me in bed? Really?" Arlo grinned. "You should see the way the light's hitting your face. You look amazing. My followers will love this." Something in my gut tightened. It wasn't a compliment anymore. It was content. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe I was being paranoid. But then, as we spent more time together, I started noticing how often Arlo filmed me without asking. Even in intimate moments, like when we'd be having dinner or lounging on the couch, he'd sneak out his camera and film me while I was talking, sometimes without telling me. I asked him about it once. "Arlo, do you always need to film everything?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He looked at me with those puppy dog eyes that always worked on me. "It's not like that. I just want to capture the moments, babe. People love seeing us together. It's good for my content. You don't mind, do you?" I didn't have an answer. What could I say? It seemed harmless. But deep down, something didn't sit right with me. There was a growing unease, like I was living out my life in front of an audience I didn't know how to escape from. The real horror started after our first big fight. It was a stupid argument, something about where we were going to go for dinner. But it escalated quickly. I raised my voice, and before I knew it, we were both shouting at each other. I stormed out of his apartment, needing space. Later that night, when I was still upset, I got a text from Arlo with a link to his latest video. "Watch this," he wrote, with a little heart emoji. I opened it, and there I was, on his YouTube channel, featured in a video titled, "Why She Got Mad at Me for No Reason. Real Fight with My Girlfriend." The thumbnail was a picture of me mid-shout, taken from earlier that day. I looked angry, my face contorted, and the title made me look like a lunatic. I watched in shock as Arlo casually explained in a breezy tone that we had a little tiff, but it was all part of the fun, and it was just a minor disagreement. He laughed it off like it was some cute, relatable content. But I wasn't laughing. I immediately called him, my voice shaking with anger. "Why the hell did you put that online? You didn't even ask me." His response was casual, almost dismissive. "Babe, it's for the content. People love this kind of stuff. You know I have to stay authentic, right? I'm just keeping it real with my followers." I was furious. I hadn't signed up for this. I wasn't just a part of his life. I was his next viral video. And the worst part, his followers ate it up. The comments flooded in, mostly laughing at my expense. "She's totally crazy, LOL," one comment read. "Love how chill Arlo is though," said another. It was clear, I wasn't his girlfriend. I was content, a character in his reality show that he controlled. My feelings didn't matter. My privacy didn't matter. I started pulling back. I'd try to keep our moments private, but the more I distanced myself, the more it felt like a game to him. He'd send me messages, asking if we were still on, then post pictures of us together with captions like, "Why we're the perfect couple," and goals. Every photo, every story felt like a scripted performance. The final straw came a week later. I had decided to end things with him. I couldn't do it anymore, the constant filming, the way he used me for views. I wasn't his brand. I was a real person. But when I tried to break up with him, he didn't fight for me. He didn't beg. Instead, he uploaded a video titled, "She Left Me," the truth about my crazy ex-girlfriend. I watched, horrified, as he aired out our private relationship details, our fights, our intimate moments, and even text messages we'd exchanged. His followers bombarded me with DMs, calling me crazy and toxic. I wasn't a person to him anymore. I was a storyline, a character in a drama he created for views. And when I tried to block him, he had his entire family call me. His mom, his sister, even his cousins, everyone started messaging me, telling me that I was ruining his career and betraying him. It felt like he was weaponizing not just his platform, but his family against me. I never spoke to him again after that. It was hard, cutting someone out of your life when you realize they never saw you as a person, just as content to be consumed. Arlo wasn't the man I thought he was. He was a manipulator, a controller, and I had been living in his show the entire time. But I'll never forget the feeling of being used for views, for likes, for clicks. And I'll never forget how much I lost, my privacy, my dignity, all for his personal brand. It all started when I met Lucas. He wasn't the type of guy you'd find at a bar or in a coffee shop. He wasn't loud or flashy, but he had a presence. He was an intimacy strategist, a certified coach, someone who helped people work through their emotional and sexual blockages. I'd never heard of anyone like him before, and admittedly, the way he spoke about sexual empowerment intrigued me. It wasn't just about the physical act of sex. It was about connection, breaking through barriers, and exploring fantasies you never thought you could. The first time we talked was at a workshop he was hosting. I wasn't even planning on going, but my friend had convinced me. "You need this," she said, pushing me to sign up. I wasn't really sure what to expect, but I figured it would be one of those self-help events. The usual stuff, learn how to talk to your partner, communicate better, blah blah. But Lucas? He wasn't your average self-help guru. There was something different about the way he spoke. It wasn't just about finding solutions. It was about exploring the deepest, most vulnerable parts of yourself and embracing them. He called it sexual expansion, and he said it was the key to truly opening up to intimacy. I wasn't sure if I bought into all of it, but when he asked for volunteers during the workshop, I found myself raising my hand. He called me up to the front, and for the next 10 minutes, we did this little exercise where he guided me through some breathing and visualization techniques. It was so unlike anything I'd ever done. It was intense, and by the end I felt lighter. There was something almost electric about it. Afterward, Lucas asked if we could chat. We talked for hours. He asked me about my past relationships, my feelings about intimacy, and if there were any fantasies I had that I hadn't explored. I was hesitant at first, but he had this way of making me feel completely safe, like I could tell him anything. And so I did. I told him things I'd never shared with anyone, the fantasies I'd kept buried. He was so encouraging. "There's nothing wrong with your desires," he'd said. "We all have them. You deserve to explore them in a safe, respectful way." It felt so validating. I thought I'd finally found someone who understood me, someone who saw me in a way no one else had. And that's when it started, slowly but steadily. A few weeks later, Lucas invited me to a one-on-one coaching session. He promised that it would be an opportunity for us to dive deeper into my emotional blocks, to really explore what had been holding me back from fully embracing my sexuality. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I trusted him. I thought this was going to be just another session, something to help me become a better version of myself. But as soon as I sat down in his office, things shifted. Lucas told me he wanted to work on helping me open up completely. "It's not just about fantasy," he said. "It's about embracing all parts of you. The raw, the real. Only then can we truly experience intimacy." At first, I thought it was a little intense, but I went along with it. He had me do exercises where I'd talk about my desires, my deepest, most hidden ones, and he would guide me through the process of releasing any shame I felt. I'll admit, it felt liberating at first. It felt like I was finally shedding layers of myself that I hadn't even known were there. But looking back, it was the beginning of something much darker than I could have ever imagined. Things progressed quickly after that. Lucas suggested I start exploring my desires in a more physical way. He wasn't just coaching me anymore. He was becoming my guide into uncharted territory. "Let's push your boundaries," he'd say. "You deserve to explore these fantasies in a safe environment. We'll create a safe container for you." He told me I should film myself while exploring these fantasies. Not to show anyone, of course. It was for me. "You'll be able to see your own growth, your own expansion," he said. "You'll see yourself surrendering to your desires, and that's how you'll truly learn to trust yourself." I wasn't sure, but I trusted Lucas. He had helped me, so I did it. I filmed myself, expressing these fantasies that had always felt so foreign to me. And then Lucas suggested something even more intense. "Let's share them with the group. You'll get feedback. You'll see how others feel about the same things you're exploring." I agreed. After all, I thought it was part of the journey. The feedback came in, comments about how brave I was, how vulnerable and open I was being. It felt good. At first, it felt empowering. I was receiving validation for doing something I had been too afraid to do before. But then it started to change. One day, I logged into my social media accounts, and there it was, one of the videos I had sent Lucas for feedback, uploaded on a private Telegram channel. My heart stopped. My face, my body, my private thoughts, everything was out there. I called Lucas immediately. "Why is this on your Telegram channel?" My voice was shaking. "Oh, it's just a way to share the journey," he said, his tone casual, almost dismissive. "It's for the community. It's important to show that this is part of healing. You're helping others." I felt like I was going to vomit. This wasn't sharing, it was exploiting me. He had taken my vulnerability, my trust, and turned it into content. He had shared my deepest confessions without my permission. He tried to explain it away, saying that it was for my own good, that I was empowering myself by showing others how to embrace their desires. But I couldn't hear him anymore. The words felt hollow, manipulative. I left him that day. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. But I had to. I had given him so much trust, so much power, and he had betrayed it all. I don't know if Lucas ever really cared about me. He didn't care about my healing. He cared about using me for his own gratification, for building his platform, for monetizing my vulnerability. I've always been the kind of person who likes to plan ahead. I have a clear idea of what I want, where I'm going, and how I'm going to get there. But when I met Hani, I wasn't expecting to be swept off my feet. And that's exactly what he did. Hani was the perfect package, a successful, well-connected businessman in Dubai, with an impeccable sense of style and charm. He had that intensity about him that made everyone around him feel like they were the most important person in the room. I thought I had met my match. He wasn't the type to talk about his wealth openly, but it was obvious. He took me to the best restaurants, showed me around the luxurious side of Dubai, and introduced me to people who seemed to live on another level. Hani wasn't just wealthy, he was influential. And I wanted to believe that he liked me for who I was, not just for my looks or because I was another interest to pass the time. But as I spent more time with him, I started to see little cracks in the shiny exterior. It wasn't until one evening when he casually mentioned the future that the cracks widened, fast. It happened at his penthouse. He'd invited me over for dinner, and the view from the floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking. Dubai's skyline glittering below, the Burj Khalifa a stark silhouette against the fading sunlight. We'd had a beautiful meal, but the real conversation started after dessert, when we moved to the balcony to watch the lights of the city come to life. You know, Hani started, casually sipping his wine, I've been thinking about our future. I wasn't expecting it. It was just a few months into our relationship, and while we had talked about potential, this wasn't something I thought he'd bring up so soon. What do you mean? I asked, not sure where the conversation was going. Well, he said, setting his glass down and leaning back, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the arm of the chair. You know, I've always wanted a family. I've built this life, and now I think it's time to move forward, start settling down. I nodded, unsure of how to respond. This was normal, right? People talked about starting families, about getting married. But then he hit me with it. I think you'd make an incredible mother, he said, his gaze locking onto mine. You have everything I'm looking for in a woman. You're smart, driven, beautiful. You'll be a perfect fit. I smiled nervously, not quite following where he was going with this. Thanks, honey. I'm flattered. He leaned forward now, and the shift in his tone made the air between us feel charged. I've been doing some thinking, he continued, and I believe we should start planning. Planning for what? He smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile I'd come to know. It was calculated, almost cold. Children. I want us to have a child together. It wasn't the we should think about the future talk I was expecting. This was something different. Something specific. He wasn't just talking about having a family. He was talking about me having his child. The conversation lingered with me long after I left his apartment. Hani wasn't shy about his intentions. He had made it clear that he wanted to move quickly. But the way he spoke about it, so matter-of-factly, it left me questioning everything. I wasn't against the idea of a family, but everything felt rushed, like there was a timeline I wasn't aware of. I knew it was too soon to talk about having children, especially in the way Hani seemed to think about it. It wasn't just about love or emotional connection, it was about planning. His words started to feel like an agenda, a checklist I was supposed to follow. The next few weeks felt strange. Whenever we were together, he would drop subtle hints, asking me about my health, about my family history, about whether I'd thought about having children. But it wasn't just casual questions, it felt like an interrogation. And then one day, he asked me to meet his special doctor. Special doctor? I asked, unsure of what he meant. I found someone who specializes in genetic alignment, he said, his eyes never leaving mine. I've been doing some research, and I think we should make sure everything's perfect before we start. Perfect? I repeated, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Hani leaned in, his voice lower now, almost conspiratorial. I want the best for our child. I want them to be the best of both of us, don't you? This doctor will help us make sure we're doing it right. We can ensure we have the best possible genes, the most ideal future. I felt sick. Something about it didn't sit right with me. Isn't this, Something we should decide together? I mean, we've only been together for a few months. Hani cut me off, his tone becoming sharp. This is about our future. You'll understand soon enough. It's just about making sure everything is aligned. Trust me. That was the moment when I started to see how deep it all went. Hani didn't want a partner. He wanted someone who could fit into his ideal picture. He wasn't looking for love. He was looking for perfection. The pressure started mounting. He insisted on me visiting this fertility clinic, where I was handed pamphlets and asked to undergo tests to ensure that I was genetically compatible with him. It wasn't about my feelings anymore. It wasn't about us. It was about meeting his standards, his expectations. One day, after I reluctantly went through all the tests, I asked him what would happen if I wasn't a perfect match. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made my stomach drop. It's not about perfection, he said. It's about potential. I'm just making sure we start this journey in the best possible way. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it wasn't about starting a journey. It was about controlling it. A few weeks later, I got a call from the clinic. They told me that the tests had come back, and everything was fine. They said Hani would be notified too, and that we could begin planning the next steps. I felt numb. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready to be controlled like this. But the worst part? I didn't know how to get out. It was the following weekend when I decided to confront him. We were at a dinner party at one of his friends' places, and everyone was talking about family. I felt so out of place. Hani's friends all spoke in glowing terms about making the perfect family and aligning the next generation. I was sinking further into this uncomfortable reality where I wasn't a partner in this relationship. I was just a vessel, a means to an end. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. After the party, I told Hani I needed to talk. We sat down, and I told him that I wasn't ready for any of this. I wasn't ready to be part of some perfect genetic plan. I didn't want to be matched or aligned. He was calm at first, but then his voice dropped. You don't get it, do you? This is for our legacy, for our future. It's not just about us. It's about what we can create together. I stood up, shaking my head. I'm not a piece of your legacy, Hani. I'm not a part of your genetic experiment. I'm a person. I left that night. I packed my things, took the first flight out, and ended the relationship. It wasn't easy, but I wasn't going to let him control me any longer. I'm still processing everything. I don't know why I didn't see it sooner, why I let myself get wrapped up in his plan for the perfect future. But now I know better. I'll never be anyone's perfect match. I'm just me, and that's all I need to be. The obligatory this actually happened last Friday. I met up with a guy from Tinder, we'll call him Tim, for a date. It was actually going pretty well. We had stuff in common and didn't seem as awkward as most dates. Drinks start flowing, I'm having a good time, and the night moves on. After we got to the third bar, he looks at his phone and says, "Hey, my best friend, we'll call him Steve, is in the area. Would you mind if he stopped by for a drink?" I was having a good time and didn't care, so told him to invite him over. We proceed to another bar where Steve is going to meet us. I then kick Tim's ass at Street Fighter and am still having fun, oblivious to what's about to happen. In walks Steve and the world stops. I immediately recognize the guy. How, you ask? Because a week prior I was talking with Steve on Tinder. We made tentative plans to meet. When the day came and he contacted me to confirm plans, I just wasn't feeling it. So I was a hole of a human and blew him off by not responding and just deleted him. Trust me, I know it was an awful thing to do, and karma chewed my ass right back. So Steve walks up to us, and it's awkward as F. Tim introduces us, and instead of saying the usual hi, he starts laughing and shaking his head. He says he needs a drink and walks off. I immediately tell Tim what happened, and take credit for being a shit stain for doing that to Steve. Tim just awkwardly laughed and didn't say much. Steve returns, "It continues to be weird as F, I deserve it." I try to cut the tension, and just straight up apologize to Steve for being a douchebag. Tension got worse. Nobody was saying anything. I had to get out of that situation for a bit, so I announced that I'm going to use the ladies' room. It's notoriously nasty in this joint, so I leave my jacket behind. When I came back, both Tim and Steve were gone, and they took my jacket with them. Thankfully, bartenders saw the whole thing, so didn't charge me for their tab. I tipped him well to start being a decent human. So to sum up, I blew off a Tinder date, then a week later ran into him whilst on a date with his best friend. Got ditched and my jacket was stolen. To clarify for several people and the haters, I didn't stand Steve up or leave him waiting anywhere, We had nothing solidly planned, and I just didn't respond when he messaged to make plans. I feel like I took the higher road and not only told Tim about it, but I straight up apologized to Steve as well. 2. I still highly doubt the whole thing was planned. Why would Tim spend several hours with me having what seemed to be a decent time, just to mess with me and ditch me? He honestly seemed like a good guy and up until the ditching and jacket incident. I used to be able to smell a scam from a mile away, but I have been left embarrassed and ashamed in falling for something that was clearly dodgy, and sadly I was blinded by my own greed. Matched with a girl from Tinder, cute Chinese girl near me called, and red flag 1. We spoke for a week, then moved to WhatsApp, where she was using a Hong Kong phone number, red flag 2. I questioned the number, and she said she had just traveled back to Shanghai, but is a student in my area, and was returning in a month, red flag 3. At this point I was certain she was fake, but over the next week she would speak about her day as normal, would send pictures/videos of her going out to places, and would send voice messages, as if we were close, which slowly gained my trust. I tried to reverse image search everything, but I couldn't find any results. Around week 3 she casually brought up cryptocurrency. Now I was already very invested in crypto for a while, and she had an incredible amount of knowledge on the subject. She mentioned that she sold all her Bitcoin, which was roughly 1 million USDT worth, and had invested in an ICO for a cryptocurrency called PBM. I tried to search for PBM everywhere, but it didn't exist. I questioned her about it, and she said that this was an exclusive ICO, which was going to be China's only cryptocurrency, which is currently only being shared among the big Chinese companies such as Alibaba, Tencent, UnionPay, Jingdong, etc. She only had access to it because her uncle works for Alibaba, and also sent me a Forbes article which confirmed all of this. She says she can give me access to it if I click on the link she sent me with an invitation code to be given access to the platform. The platform was called BFF.cash, dodgy name red flag 4. I look online and can't find it anywhere other than this link, but I register anyway, and it looks like a lot of work has gone in it to make it look as real as possible. The brand of the platform was called EQ Exchange, and it gave you wallet which allowed you to invest in the major cryptocurrencies such as BTC and ETH with accurate price index. This is major red flag 5. You could only deposit by withdrawing crypto from another crypto wallet, which was in my case Binance, and send a screenshot of the successful withdrawal. I didn't know how to do this, and to no surprise to me now, she was able to give exact instructions on how to do it. I only deposited 1,000 USDT to start with, and I would try to withdraw back to Binance just to test it, and it was transferred back into my Binance wallet within 20 minutes. This gained my trust in the platform and put the money into the ICO, and it would get me about 300 PBM as the value was around 3 USD. The next couple of days she was boasting how she had bought 1 million PBM when it first launched a month earlier at a price of 0.002 USDT, and how I should buy more because the value is increasing quickly before the ICO ends on the May 24th, 2021. Over the next week I got carried away and ended up investing 50,000 USDT. Dumb I know. We kept talking for another week and talking about how rich we were going to be, but then she started becoming more aggressive about investing more, and I should max out credit cards, get a bank loan, and use my family's money, which finally smacked me out of her spell, and realized that I can't actually withdraw my money from this ICO. I panic and search everywhere about possible scams with these details, but I couldn't find anything for ages until I came across a translated Bulgarian article that matches everything. I'm devastated. I don't question her straight away. Instead, I tried to scam her back by convincing her to transfer 50,000 USDT to my BFF.cash wallet, refused to do it on Binance, and then take it for myself, but they quickly realized and froze my account. I played dumb to her about it for a while, but she eventually blocked me, and now I'm here. I know I will get, if you're dumb enough to fall for it, then you deserve to lose your money, which is true, but I really needed to get this out there for anyone about to go through the same situation. No honorary, this happened a few weeks ago. I am sitting in a cafe parking lot trying to figure out what the F just happened last night. Background information. I downloaded Tinder to give men another go. Maybe if I adjust my age range and find someone a little older than me, I'll find someone who's better than average to mattress mambo with. Here's where Kyle comes into play. We've been talking for a week. East Coast transplant, country-ish, truck driving, tattooed, physically fit, well-groomed, busy with his career, doing his own thing sort of dude. The second half of his descriptors are my type. I know, but your girl is desperate. He's also a veteran. We get along over text, fun, friendly banter. We FaceTime a few times and generally seem to, for a lack of a better word, vibe. Further into the week, our conversation gets really flirty. We seem to have similar interests, and the mention of a safe word comes up. Green flag. I'm okay with that. We both live a little outside of a big city, so we got a hotel and met up in the city. I am more familiar with the city than Kyle is. I've parked, and I go meet him, and we find a place for him to leave his truck. After we park, he asked me to get his gun from the glove box while he's making sure everything is in his bag. I live in a state where concealed carry/owning a gun is pretty normal, and he comes from one similar. This wasn't weird to me, but feels relevant to the story. I jokingly said, "I don't want my fingerprints on your gun," as I handed him his gun, only touching the sleeve it was in. I hope he jokingly said, "This one is not my burner gun." Yikes number 1. On our way to the bar, the sidewalk is packed, and we are trying to get indoors. Kyle touched the back of this guy and said, "Hey, excuse me." As I walked by the man that Kyle touched, the man says, "Don't f***ing touch me ever again." Kyle turns around and yells, "Well then don't stand in the fucking way." Yikes. We get food and 2 beers, and this is when I realize Kyle is a little more toxic gender roles and conservative than I realized. Not a big deal, I love Red Dead Redemption. This man can still make a comeback. We head home after getting drinks and dinner. We turn on the TV, we're sitting on the couch, and pretty much lots of heavy petting turns into kissing, turns into making babies. This man and I go for rounds. Imagine a ping pong game, and no body is finishing, but we just keep tying the game. Someone's gotta win by 2. Deuce. The sex is good. No safe word has been dropped. It's just casual good 2 horny people sex. I think we started at 11:30 p.m. and the third round ended at like 1:20 a.m. After the water break, round 4 starts up and everything is going fine. I'm going to try and be as detailed as possible without giving too much information out there. This man is standing up, I am laying on my back on the couch going down on him. He's clearly enjoying it. I can hear and physically tell. I kid you not. I don't know how to say this. I don't know how to type these words out. But he peed in my mouth. I literally got up and spit the shit out everywhere and asked him what the fuck. He laughed. Kyle says something to the effect of, "I like doing things that catch people off guard." Clearly Kyle. After that, night is ruined. I go shower alone, and it's obvious that I'm like not into him. I go to bed, this man snores like a f***ing chainsaw. Now you're asking, why don't you get the fuck up and run away in that moment? The accumulation of red flags made it feel safer to stay and get the hell out later. Next morning, I pack my shit up and say goodbye, and he asks if we're gonna hang out again. Oh my god. Now I'm drinking coffee, and I'm about to go pick up my little brother from school. For starters, this happened about a week ago. Lockdown has been very boring for many, so I, 18 male, in my ultimate world of wisdom, decided to give the good ol' Tinder a try. It was an average morning, and I got a match with, let's call her Sandra. By about 2 p.m. we had been talking back and forth before she ultimately asks for my Snapchat, to which I albeit stupidly complied. Time passes by, and I'm going on with my day when it comes to be time to walk the doggo. I tell her I'm going on a walk and that I will message later. Anyways, about half an hour into my walk I receive a red snap. For those not familiar with Snapchat, this is a picture message. To my absolute surprise and horror, it's a picture of the front of my street. I replied to what I was only hoping is a freak coincidence. After all, Sandra claimed she had lived about 45 minutes away from my house, which I had never disclosed the location of. I asked what she was doing, and she said she wanted to come to get to know me in person, and explained that she'd looked at my Snapchat maps and decided to drive down. Stupidly willing to give a girl with a bit of commitment a chance, I decided to tell her to come meet me on my dog walk as a little get-to-know-each-other stroll. However, as a car pulls into the car park, I think nothing of it until the car pulls up to me and announces herself as Sandra, looking not even a tiny bit like her photos. I'm not a person to judge, as even I can understand that you can edit photos to your advantage, etc. However, she did not look the tiniest bit like her photos and was very overweight, which I again have no problem with. However, I'm just not attracted to overweight people whatsoever. Next red flag was her refusal to get out of the car, which came as a surprise, as she's been so keen to come see me. I can understand it, though, as it's going meeting someone new, then going on a countryside walk. Anyways, I come to the conclusion that I should walk home and tell her to stay there so that I can meet her again, and so that she didn't know my house number for the exact reason that occurred. I walk off towards my house, and as I go around the corner, I look behind me to see her slowly following behind. I proceed to do the only thing my head tells me to do, and book it down the path and make it to my house with her car out of sight. I sit in my room, and not knowing what else to do, I turn off my location and prepare a message to apologize for not being able to make it out. That's when the doorbell goes, and I jump to my feet to see her car in my driveway. I practically flew down the stairs, only to find her talking to my mom, explaining how I'd invited her over for tea. I didn't. Obviously, my mom, being the kind-hearted person she is, happily invites her in, as our tea was already prepared. What preceded was the most awkward, horrendous, and every other bad word of a meal I have ever endured. Topped off when she admitted to lying about her age on her Tinder profile, and proclaimed she was 27 as opposed to the 18 on her profile. This might not seem so bad, but for someone who's recently turned 18, 27 is a huge jump, and not something I would have agreed to. My mom was horrified and ended up making an excuse that we had to go to some family event. I never thought I'd end up with someone like Max. He was different, not in the sense of quirky or offbeat, but in a way that made me feel like I was living in someone else's world. He had this level of discipline, of control, that I found fascinating at first. Max was a biohacker, which sounded like something straight out of a science fiction movie, but when he explained it, it all sounded so plausible. He could optimize everything about his body, his sleep, his food, his productivity, by tracking data and making the tiniest tweaks to his lifestyle. It was like living in a world where the perfect version of yourself wasn't just a dream, it was a goal. And I found that incredibly attractive. We met at a coffee shop one afternoon, and it wasn't like the usual small talk. He asked me questions about myself that I hadn't been asked in ages, real questions about my health, my routines, my habits. He was interested, and for the first time in a while, I felt like I was talking to someone who really wanted to understand me. We talked for hours that day, and as the sun set, it was clear we had a connection. Max wasn't like the other guys I'd dated. He wasn't obsessed with status or making things look perfect. He was about optimization, about getting the most out of life. I was intrigued, maybe a little in awe. Over the next few weeks, our relationship grew quickly. Max was intense. There was no other way to describe him. Everything in his life had a reason, a purpose. The food he ate was calculated. The workouts he did were precise. His sleep schedule was a science experiment in itself. He was always talking about new supplements, new ways to increase focus, to boost energy, to hack your biology. He'd recommend different diets or sleep routines, claiming they'd help me feel better. It wasn't pushy, at least not at first. He just knew things, and I trusted him. One day, he invited me to his apartment to hang out, and he casually mentioned that he'd been tracking his own vitals, his blood pressure, his glucose levels, his heart rate, and that it was helping him understand how to optimize his energy and mood. I laughed it off at first, thinking it was some weird hobby. But then he asked me if I'd ever thought about doing the same thing. You could get so much out of knowing exactly how your body's working, he said, his eyes lighting up. It's all data, you know? If you track your health, you can fix the problems you didn't even know you had. He started suggesting that I get a fitness tracker, one that measured my heart rate, my steps, my calories burned. It's just data, he said, but it's the kind of data that can change your life. I was skeptical, but Max was so passionate, and it didn't hurt to have a little more insight into my health, right? So I bought the tracker. At first, it was fun. I'd check my steps, track my sleep, and get a glimpse into what I was doing with my body. But Max wasn't satisfied with just that. He kept pushing me to gather more data. How are you feeling today? We should track your mood. It's important, he said one evening while we were having dinner. He made it sound like the most natural thing in the world. So I started logging my mood, my energy levels, everything I ate, every workout I did. The tracker had an app, and Max showed me how to use it properly. It was all about optimization, he insisted. The more data we had, the better we could improve ourselves. But then the lines started to blur. One day, after a particularly intense workout session, Max asked me to sync my tracker with his system. I've got all these programs that analyze the data. It's like a blueprint for your body, he explained, a little too eagerly. I hesitated, but Max's reassurance was convincing. It'll help us figure out exactly what's going on. We'll be able to fine-tune your energy levels, your sleep patterns, everything. I agreed, thinking it was harmless. What was the worst that could happen? The next day, I noticed something strange. Max had sent me a message with a link to a new health supplement he wanted me to try. He'd been studying my data, he said, and had picked out something that could improve my energy. It was all laid out, with graphs and charts showing how it would help me optimize my body's performance. I was skeptical but curious. Max was so sure of himself, so confident in his methods. A week later, I started feeling different. But it wasn't a good different. I felt jittery, more anxious, and my sleep started to suffer. When I mentioned it to Max, he was quick to dismiss it. "It's just your body adjusting to the new supplements," he said. "Give it time." But it wasn't just the supplements. My data was being tracked constantly. Max would ask me how I was feeling after each meal, after each workout, even after small things like taking a walk or getting coffee. He asked me to track everything, how my skin felt, how my digestion was, my mood swings. He even insisted on measuring my body temperature at certain points during the day. "You need to know everything about yourself," he told me one evening, his voice serious. "The body doesn't lie. But the more you track, the more control you have over it." And it was working. I was feeling more energized at times, and some of the mood swings eased. But at what cost? I couldn't escape the feeling that I was becoming part of his experiment. Max wasn't just tracking my health, he was controlling it. The deeper I got into this routine, the more disconnected I felt from my own body. Every day, I logged every aspect of myself, but it wasn't me anymore. It was data. My body had become an equation to solve, and I was the subject in Max's little experiment. Then came the breaking point. I was at Max's place one evening, and he casually handed me a new device. "I've been working on something," he said, his eyes practically glowing with excitement. "This will help us track your hormone levels. It'll show us exactly what's going on with your body. I've been experimenting with it on myself, and the results are amazing." I looked at the device. It was a small patch that stuck to your skin, and it was supposed to track hormonal fluctuations throughout the day. But when I asked how it worked, Max only shrugged and said, "It's a prototype. But trust me, it's going to give us incredible insight." That night, I went to bed wearing the device, and the next day I started to feel off. My emotions were all over the place, and I felt like I was constantly being monitored. When I woke up the next morning, I saw a message from Max. "How are you feeling? The data from the patch is coming through. I'm analyzing it now." I looked at the patch on my skin, and the thought hit me like a punch in the gut. He's watching me. All the time. I confronted Max later that day. He was calm as always, when I told him how uncomfortable it all made me. "You're just overthinking it," he said, dismissing my concerns. "This is for your own good. You want to feel better, don't you?" But I didn't want to feel like an experiment. I didn't want to be some lab rat in Max's personal study. The more he pushed, the more I realized I wasn't in a relationship. I was part of his biohacking project. He wasn't interested in me. He was interested in optimizing me. I left him that night. I threw away the trackers, deleted the app, and took a long walk to clear my head. It wasn't easy. It wasn't simple. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let someone control me through data anymore. It was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime. The dream moved to Lisbon, the city of pastel-colored buildings, cobblestone streets, and a fresh start. I had always wanted to live abroad, experience a new culture, and leave behind the familiar, the mundane. So when Luca, my boyfriend of 6 months, proposed the idea, I jumped at it. It felt like a new chapter, an exciting one. The first few weeks were magical. I remember the first day I stepped off the plane, the air warm and salty from the ocean breeze. Luca was waiting for me, his usual calm demeanor radiating a sense of control. I remember how he held my hand and smiled as he told me, "This is going to be amazing, just wait." We rented a small apartment near the Alfama district. The place was cozy, with an old-world charm and a view of the Tagus River. I was in love with the city. Every corner felt like a postcard. Every street was an invitation to explore. We spent our days walking through the markets, sipping espresso in cafes, and going to beautiful restaurants. Everything seemed perfect. But I wasn't in Lisbon for vacation. I was here to live, and eventually reality began to sink in. I had to find work. At first, Luca reassured me that it would be easy, that I could take my time to adjust, enjoy the city, and find something that felt right. He had some friends who could help me get into the community, he said. He was already established here, so why rush? It sounded like a dream. Who wouldn't want to take their time and explore a new city while their partner supported them? But the longer I stayed, the more I began to feel trapped. I started looking for jobs, but nothing panned out. The language barrier was harder than I anticipated, and my skills didn't align with the job market in Lisbon. Every time I applied for something, I'd get a polite rejection email or, worse, no response at all. Days stretched into weeks, and my savings were starting to dwindle. I knew I had to find something soon, but Luca kept telling me, "Take your time. We're in no rush. Focus on enjoying the experience." He would remind me of all the things I'd wanted to do before we moved here, like writing, painting, exploring the culture, and I found myself falling into a routine of waking up, drinking coffee, and browsing job boards, feeling a little more discouraged each day. Luca's reassurance began to feel like a subtle form of control. I'd ask him about his work, about how he was able to make ends meet while working remotely. He'd always brush it off, never giving me the full picture. "I just know how to hustle," he'd say, his voice casual. "You don't have to worry about it. I've got it covered." But I had to worry about it, and after a while, it became clear that my worries weren't just about money. It was about the strange imbalance between us, the way he kept me in this bubble, away from the real world. It was as if he was the one in control of everything, when I could work, when I could relax, when I could make decisions for myself. I never felt like an equal. One day, Luca suggested we go for a walk in the park. It was one of those perfect Lisbon afternoons, with the sun shining and a light breeze. We strolled for hours, talking about everything, how beautiful the city was, what we were going to do that weekend, and inevitably my job search. "You're overthinking it," Luca said as we sat on a bench overlooking the river. He had this way of looking at me, as if he had all the answers and I was just a little lost. "I've been thinking about it. I think you should stop looking for a job." I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "I can't just stop looking." He smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was more like a challenge. "Why not? You've been trying so hard. Maybe it's not meant to be right now. You're not happy when you're stressed. You need a break." I opened my mouth to argue, but he cut me off. "Listen," he said, his voice softer now. "You've been working your whole life. You deserve a break. This is a chance to reset. We're living in one of the most beautiful cities in the world. You should be focusing on yourself, us." His words were like a balm, soothing my frustration and worry. And for a moment, I believed him. Maybe I had been pushing too hard. Maybe I needed to relax, take a step back, and let things unfold naturally. He was so convincing, so sure of himself. But soon, I realized that Luca wasn't asking me to relax. He was telling me to stop living. Weeks passed, and I found myself doing less and less. Luca would go off to work in the mornings, leaving me alone in the apartment. I spent my days reading, trying to learn more about the city, but the unease never went away. The longer I stayed in that apartment, the more I felt like I was losing myself. Every time I ventured out, it was like something was holding me back, some invisible force making me feel smaller, less capable. One evening, I came home to find Luca on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up when I walked in. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. I was thinking about applying for a part-time job, just something to help with the bills. Luca looked up at me then, his expression unreadable. "What for?" "I told you, I've got it covered." I paused, not knowing how to explain what I was feeling. "I don't want to just sit here all day, Luca. I need to feel like I'm contributing, like I'm doing something meaningful." He sighed, putting his phone down. "You're contributing by being here, by supporting me. You're my partner. I don't need you working." There was again the subtle manipulation. The words, wrapped in sweetness, made me feel like I was ungrateful for wanting to work, for wanting independence. He had made it clear that his idea of our life together didn't include me standing on my own 2 feet. It included me relying on him. The worst part wasn't just the control. It was the isolation. Luca had convinced me to cut off most of my old contacts. "You don't need them," he'd say, every time I mentioned calling a friend back home. "They'll just stress you out. You've got me now." And in the beginning, it felt fine. I was caught up in the romance of it all, the adventure, the excitement of living in a new place. But as time passed, I realized something was wrong. I was cut off from the world. My friends, my family, my support system, it was all gone. I had no one but him. The breaking point came one morning, when I woke up to find a plane ticket on the kitchen table. The ticket was for a flight back to the US in 2 weeks. I stood there frozen. My mind raced. Luca walked into the room, his face unreadable. "I thought it was time for you to go home," he said, his voice flat. "I've been thinking about it. Maybe it's time for you to see your family again. You need to take a break. You're not happy here." The truth hit me like a slap. This wasn't about me going to see my family. This was about him getting rid of me. He had no intention of ever letting me stand on my own 2 feet. He had manipulated me into a corner, isolated me in a foreign country, and now he was trying to push me out of the picture. "I'm not leaving," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't need to go back. I'm here to stay." His expression didn't change. "You don't have a choice. You're going." I left that night. I didn't take the ticket. I didn't tell him anything. I walked out of the apartment, down the narrow streets of Lisbon, and never looked back. I met him at a fundraising event for a local health charity. The venue was sleek, the crowd was glamorous, and I was more interested in the free hors d'oeuvres than in the speeches. But then I saw him, Adam. He was standing across the room, talking to someone with that kind of effortless charm people usually only read about. He was dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, but it wasn't the clothes that caught my attention. It was the way he moved. Confident, sure, but there was something else, something that made me look twice. He noticed me looking, gave me a quick smile, and walked over. It wasn't the kind of approach you usually get at these things. No cheesy pickup lines, no awkward small talk. He started with a simple question. "How's your night going?" It was direct but warm, almost like he was genuinely interested. We hit it off instantly. We talked about everything: life, travel, health, and it felt so easy, so natural. Adam was the kind of guy who seemed to know something about everything. He spoke with this calm assurance, like he was the type who always had the answers. He told me he worked in biotech, but that he also volunteered at clinics, helping people get into clinical trials for experimental treatments. It was impressive and a little overwhelming. At first, I wasn't sure what to make of him. He was polished, but there was something about the way he seemed to glide through the crowd, like he was always in control, that felt a little too perfect. But still, I found myself drawn to him. A week later, he reached out. "I know this sounds crazy, but I've been thinking about you since the event. How about we grab dinner sometime?" He had that way of making everything sound like a great idea. So of course I said yes. Our first date was at a small, upscale restaurant. The kind of place where the waiters greet you by name, and the candles on the table flicker like they're part of a scene from a movie. Adam ordered for both of us, which felt a little presumptuous at first, but when the food arrived, it was the best meal I'd had in a long time. We talked about everything again, except this time, there was a noticeable shift. He wanted to know about my health, about my family's history, about my physical well-being. It was invasive, in a way, but he made it sound so normal, so natural. "Has anyone in your family ever struggled with chronic conditions?" he asked, his voice so smooth, like he was just asking about the weather. I hesitated. I'd had some health issues in the past, nothing major, but chronic fatigue had been a part of my life for years. I'd been managing it, but it wasn't something I typically talked about. But with Adam, I found myself opening up. He had this way of listening, of making you feel like your struggles were the most important thing in the world. It was comforting in a way. "I get tired easily," I said, shrugging. "It's something I've learned to live with." "Have you ever looked into alternative treatments?" he asked, his gaze never leaving mine. "I know some really good doctors, people who specialize in trials that could really help you." I wasn't sure why, but the idea sounded appealing. I wasn't getting the results I wanted with traditional medicine, and the thought of something new, something experimental, seemed exciting. Maybe Adam could help me, I thought. He had this air of authority, of knowledge that made him feel like the kind of person who could solve problems. "Maybe I'll look into it," I said, not realizing how much that moment would change everything. The days after that first date were a whirlwind. Adam became more and more present in my life, checking in after doctor's appointments, sending me articles about new treatments, offering to connect me with his colleagues who could help. At first, I thought it was sweet. He seemed like he genuinely cared about my well-being. But slowly, I began to notice something darker. It wasn't just that he was offering help. It was how he insisted. How every conversation about my health led to him making more suggestions. How he made me feel like I was missing out on something bigger if I didn't try his way. "Have you ever thought about quitting your medication?" he asked one night as we sat on the couch in his apartment. I froze. I hadn't expected that. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. "Your medication is just masking the real problem," he said, leaning forward. "You have to go to the root cause. I can help you with that. There are trials, treatments, real solutions, but you need to trust me." It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a gentle piece of advice. It was an order wrapped in concern. And it scared me. But I didn't say anything. I just nodded, unsure of how to respond. Over the next few weeks, Adam became more involved in my treatment plans. He introduced me to his colleagues, doctors who specialized in experimental treatments. He arranged for me to undergo tests, trials, and evaluations that I didn't really understand. But I didn't question him. He was adamant that this was the only way forward. He told me that the treatment I was on wasn't working, that it was holding me back, and that the new treatments could fix everything. I was desperate, so I agreed. And then the money started flowing. It wasn't a lot at first, just small sums for trials and consultations. But soon, it became clear that Adam's idea of helping me was costing me more than I could afford. He convinced me to take out loans for treatments, to pay up front for access to experimental drugs and procedures that weren't covered by insurance. He made it sound like an investment in my future. "You'll be healed," he'd say, his eyes gleaming with that familiar confidence. "And once you're better, you'll be able to do anything. No more fatigue. You'll feel like a new person." But I wasn't feeling better. I was getting worse. One day, after a particularly grueling treatment session, I was so dizzy I could barely stand. I called Adam, told him I wasn't feeling well, that something didn't seem right. He told me it was all part of the process. "You're detoxing," he said. "This is how healing works." I didn't know who to trust anymore. Was this helping me? Or was it making everything worse? It wasn't until one evening, when I stumbled upon a folder on Adam's laptop, that I realized how deep I had fallen into his trap. I had gone over to his place to pick up some documents he'd promised to help me with. But when I opened the laptop, I saw something I wasn't supposed to. There were recordings, videos of me, of my breakdowns, of the times when the pain had become unbearable, when I'd been so vulnerable that I'd let my guard down completely. Adam had been filming me, documenting my suffering without my consent. I felt my stomach drop. I scrolled through the files, sickened by what I saw. These weren't videos for my treatment, they were content for his healing journey vlog. He had been using my pain as material. He was profiting off my suffering. I confronted him that night. His response was cold, calculated. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice smooth as always. "It's for the greater good. You're helping so many people by showing them what real healing looks like." I didn't see it at first. How could I? It wasn't like he came out and told me, "Hey, I'm completely under my mom's thumb." No, it was much more subtle than that. The way he smiled when he mentioned her name, the way his eyes would flicker with a hint of guilt whenever she called, the way he always made sure to say goodnight to her before he hung up the phone with me. It started innocently enough. I met Jae-hyun at a party thrown by a mutual friend, and I was instantly drawn to him. He was charming, successful, everything I thought I wanted. He had that look about him, you know, the polished, confident type that seemed to glide through life without a care in the world. But when we got to talking, it was his attention to detail that stood out. He asked thoughtful questions, remembered things I mentioned offhand, and made me feel like I was the only one in the room. A few weeks into dating, Jae-hyun invited me to dinner at his place. The apartment was sleek and minimalist. Everything was in its place, the kind of place you'd see in a design magazine. I was impressed. We ate, talked, laughed, and everything felt normal. But the moment his mother called, everything shifted. He answered the phone in the other room, his voice low, almost hesitant. I could hear snippets of the conversation through the thin walls. "Yes, I'll be home tomorrow," he said. "I'll check in before bed, Mom." It was strange, but I didn't think too much of it at first. But then, over time, I began to notice things. Little things that gnawed at me. The first red flag came after a weekend trip to the mountains. We'd had a blast, hiking, eating well, and getting to know each other better. But as soon as we returned, his mood shifted. He was distant, almost withdrawn. He didn't tell me why, but I could tell something was off. A day later, he admitted that his mom had called him 3 times during our trip to check on him, asking if he'd eaten, if he was sleeping well, if he needed anything. It was like she couldn't let him breathe without her interference. "She just worries," he said, but there was something in his eyes when he said it, something that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't until I met her that the full scope of the situation hit me. I had no idea what I was walking into. The dinner was casual at first, at a restaurant Jae-hyun had chosen. I was nervous, not knowing what to expect, but when she arrived, she was warm, welcoming, a bit too warm, if I'm being honest. She had this air of control about her, like she was constantly aware of everyone in the room, making sure everything was just so. She sat down, barely acknowledging me beyond a polite smile. But then it started. The subtle comments about how I should dress more elegantly, how I should eat more carefully. Apparently, I didn't know how to use chopsticks properly. I smiled, but inside, something was shifting. I wasn't a guest at dinner. I was already being judged, examined, assessed. Jae-hyun seemed uncomfortable too, fidgeting with his napkin. I couldn't understand why he wasn't stepping in, saying something, but instead, he just let his mom steer the conversation. It wasn't until the second course arrived that the conversation shifted to me, and by that, I mean it shifted to my future, my body, my health, my potential. His mother asked me about my plans for children. No preamble, no small talk, just straight to it. How many children do you plan on having? Are you going to wait long, or will you be ready soon? We need to make sure the family name is passed on. I froze. Jae-hyun looked at me with wide eyes, but said nothing. I hadn't really thought about it yet, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. His mother smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was more like a motherly smile that said, I already know what's best for you, dear. Well, it's important, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. You should start planning. Your body isn't getting any younger, after all. Your future is tied to Jae-hyun's success. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. She was talking about me like I was a cog in some bigger machine, a machine that was entirely about her son's legacy. And then it hit me. This wasn't about me. It was about the family system. The power dynamic between Jae-hyun, his mother, and me was becoming painfully clear. From that night on, things took a darker turn. The more time I spent with Jae-hyun, the more his mother seemed to embed herself into our relationship. She would call constantly, always asking what we were doing, where we were going. And whenever we made plans, Jae-hyun would often pause, look at his phone, and say, My mom wants me to check in. She's worried about me. I thought it was sweet at first, his loyalty to his mom, his dedication. But it became clear that it wasn't just care. It was control. The worst part was when I started to notice how much Jae-hyun still relied on her approval for everything. At first, it seemed like a harmless quirk. He would ask for her opinion on what to wear or what car to buy. But soon, it turned into something more insidious. When I brought up things I wanted for our future, like a place of our own, my own career path, our own time together, he'd look at me, eyes wide and apologetic, and say, I have to talk to my mom about it first. I was shocked. His mother wasn't just involved in his life, she was running it. And I was just another piece in the puzzle, waiting for her approval. I didn't know how to confront him about it. I didn't know how to put into words what was suffocating me. It wasn't just that I felt like a third wheel in our relationship. It was that his mother had already decided what my role was. She had already laid out my life for me, and Jae-hyun was just following her script. The final straw came one evening when I found myself sitting at dinner with both of them. It was awkward, the air thick with unspoken tension. His mom had made some comment about how my career wouldn't matter once I became a mother. I tried to brush it off, but when I saw Jae-hyun glance at his mom with that same apologetic look, I knew. I wasn't his partner. I was his future wife. And his mom wasn't just a part of our life. She was the one who would decide it all. That night, I left his apartment. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't explain. I just packed my things and left, because the truth was, I wasn't dating Jae-hyun. I was dating her. And I didn't want to be part of that twisted, suffocating family system.